All right. Here with my mother. Camera's right up there.
Okay.
Here with my mom, Catherine Keller, and we're hanging out in Arizona. And recently, you've gotten an inkling to start recording some of your life. You've been writing some chapters in the book, which I think will be excellent. But I thought we'd also just have some conversations about your life, some of your experiences, a lot of your adventures with God, some really cool stories. Some stories I actually share with a lot of my coaching clients. So back to the beginning, where were you born?
Oh, that's boring.
Well, you got to start somewhere, though. You got to start at the beginning is a good place to start.
Beginning is a good place to start. I was born actually at St. Mary's Hospital in Superior, Wisconsin, the very northern tip of Wisconsin, which is sort of logically on Lake Superior. And it is very cold. Now living in Arizona, when it's 110 in the summer, I say, well, no ice.
No ice.
No ice to slip on or
So you're the youngest of two?
No, I am.
That's right.
I am the middle of three. I did have a sister, Harriet, who was 4 years younger than I am.
4 years younger. Okay.
Right.
So, so you also have an older brother?
I had an older brother, William,
passed away,
who was 13 months older than I am.
Okay. No,
and he.
So I'm learning all sorts of new stuff already.
He passed away about probably a year and a half ago.
Yeah, maybe a little more.
At the young and tender age of probably 80-something.
So, what are some of the things, what's kind of spurned you to go, I need to tell some stories?
Well, let me see this. A very foundational part of my life happened very impactful part of my life happened when I was 2 months old. And my mother was nursing me. And when I was 2 months old, her father died. And they put me back in the nursery in the hospital while they went for 2 weeks while they went to the funeral in Iowa.
It's a long time for a funeral.
Well,
2 weeks.
I suppose they had other things they had to take care of while they were down there.
Yeah.
And they drove. That's a long way. I mean, I suppose wanted to make it worth their while.
Back in ancient history, it's not like I got interstates.
No. And there was no air conditioning, etc., in a car or a home. Anyway, my mother told me several times when I was very small that when they got back, the doctor said, I am so glad you're back because we have not been able to adjust her formula. And she has cried the entire time you've been gone. Well, emotionally, what I learned many years later was that I was an abandoned child. And as a result of that, had absolutely no sense of self-worth whatsoever. I was very fragile emotionally.
Yeah. So, what are some of the stories you'd like to tell about how you've overcome that, what you've learned in life, what you should pass on? So what's this first thing, our bonus? What's that about?
That's about Kit's Kirschberg.
Okay. That was cool. You know what I found very interesting, the stories about your great-grandmother.
Okay, that's...
So what was her name?
Her name was Cora Bell.
Cora Bell. And what were her brothers? How many kids were in the family?
Well, apparently she had 4 brothers.
4
No,
brothers.
3 brothers.
What
3
were their
brothers.
names, do you know?
Oh, I think their names are so significant as far as the general outlook of the times, which must have been very spiritually orientated, very rigid. Anyway, their names were Amer Archimedes, Quinby
Archimedes.
Elias, and Nathan Lysander.
Nathan Lysander.
Now, that's...
So kids, are you glad we did not name you what? Aquimit? Like
Amer Archimedes.
Amer Archimedes.
Yes.
Wow.
Quinby Elias. I
Quinby
think
Elias.
and Nathan Lysander.
Nathan Lysander. Interesting. So, what they come over here said they're like on a covered wagon, crossing the prairie.
Now, yeah.
To Iowa.
Okay. They were living in the Ohio Territory.
Okay.
And this was in sort of probably about the 1830s, 40s. Okay. And everybody was hearing about more fertile lands, etc., out west. And that's where the life was better and hopefully easier.
Do you know what they did for a living or anything in Ohio?
I have no idea, but I assume they were farmers.
Maybe.
Although my grandmother always wished my grandfather were more aspiring, and that he would have been a lawyer. Her brothers, I think, became lawyers.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And she wished he would be a lawyer or a doctor or something. She had she was very demanding of herself and sort of passed that on to her daughters. All her children, they had 5 children, and this was it was before the Depression, but it was still a hard life for 5 children.
Yeah.
And in spite of that, all of her children went to college. 3 of them got their master's degrees, which was huge at that time.
Yeah.
And
I'm a crack on the whip.
Yeah. Well, I think just somehow inspiring them. Yeah.
Well, tell the story about
Uncle Newell.
Well, tell the story about the sod house, and
Okay.
that was very interesting.
Okay, they went west in a covered wagon to the prairies in Nebraska, and
So you show up in a big field, you're like, okay, I guess this will do.
This is it.
Build something.
Yeah, and the only building material that there was a prevalence of was sod, and you cut sod out in squares and you stacked them up, and then you found branches someplace and made a frame for the roof and somehow stacked the sod up and made the roof.
The whole story sounds peculiarly like Little House on the Prairie. Like all the details, I'm like, oh my God, that's what happened to Laura Ingalls Wilder.
Exactly. Anyway, they built a sod house. The part of the story that Grandma enjoyed telling was that before the sod was dried enough, cured enough, there was an unseasonable rainstorm. And because it wasn't cured, the rain came right through the roof, and everything and everybody was drenched, including, Grandma was small enough that she could stand inside the grandfather clock and stay warm.
Put a big value on that grandfather clock, hauling that thing across the prairie in the covered wagon.
Exactly.
Wow.
The grandfather clock and a little walnut rocker, which I always thought was so incredibly beautiful.
I think I remember that. I sat in that rocker, haven't I?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I very much enjoyed polishing that as a little girl, and I was very proud of it.
Now, didn't you tell me a story about blizzards and tying children together.
Yeah,
What was
yeah.
that about?
Well, the stories she told were the details I remember were the very basics. If you read Little House on the Prairie,
I wonder if she was friends with Laura Ingalls Wilder. I mean,
anyway,
it could be.
Could be. Same vintage, maybe. Anyway, when the teacher would see the sky clouding up and getting dark, and when she knew a blizzard was on its way, she would tie all the children together and start walking as fast as they could go to the nearest homestead and hopefully get there before the blizzard struck. Because when you, as you know, if you're lost, you walk in circles and you never end up where you're going.
Yeah, all those times I've been lost in a blizzard. That's what.
Oh, now we've got your number. Anyway, so there were the challenges of blizzards, and another thing was prairie fires. If a fire started someplace on the prairie, which it could with lightning or anything else, there was nothing to stop it. You couldn't call 911. Nobody was there. There was no phone to begin with. And she said her father would hitch the horse to the plow and frantically begin plowing circles in the sod around the house so there would be less grass to burn, and hopefully that they could beat it out with something rather than just having total flames engulfing the house.
Do you know that the worst forest fire in our country's history actually happened in northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan area?
Okay, was that...
I forget the name. It happened the exact same time as the Chicago fire.
Really?
But anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500 people died.
Oh, that was Hinckley. It would have to be Hinckley.
Maybe. But there was such fire, you call it fire tornadoes, like the
firestorm.
It was knocking railroad cars down.
Oh my goodness.
Pushing, moving, blowing houses away just from the wind that the fire generated. Anyways, interesting side note. So what else do we know about Cora Bell? The story.
Uncle.
Oh yeah, that was very interesting.
Okay.
Uncle Newell. My middle name's Newell. So
yeah, Newell S. Huber.
Newell S. Huber.
Yeah.
What does the S stand for?
Scott.
Newell Scott.
Yeah.
Huber. H-U-B.
And her husband was Winfield Scott.
Winfield Scott Huber.
Yeah. Anyway, Uncle Newell was in the Army in the First World War. And the most catastrophic thing about the war was influenza, which...
That's interesting. Your dad was also...
Yes, okay. He was in the Navy. He was on an escort vessel. And the thing I remember his telling...
So was Newell older when he was during the war? Because if both both your grandfather and your dad were both in World War I then.
Your grandfather.
But your dad was in World War I.
Yes.
And Cora Bell's husband was in World War I.
No, her son.
Oh.
Her son came home from World War.
Details. Okay,
yes,
got
her
it.
son came home from World War I.
So your mom's brother.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Okay, he came home from World War I. He had the flu, and I read fairly recently between 50 and 100 million people worldwide died of the flu.
Yeah.
Unbelievably awful.
Well, right. Yeah, right. It really, really spiked. Influenza spiked right during the war. I think 200,000 people in this country died, which is actually quite low compared to worldwide. But your dad talked about how he remembered he was on a troop carrier and he said they would stop the troop would stop the convoy. They would bury people every single night dying from the flu.
He said they came from France. They came into New Jersey. Everybody was healthy. They had a weekend in port and they left. And from that time on, the entire convoy would stop every night to bury people at sea.
Wow.
It was that bad.
Craziness.
Total craziness. Anyway, the doctors told my grandmother that Newell was paralyzed. He would never walk again. And she said, we'll see about that.
Don't mess with the mama.
Yeah.
She's a tough old bird, she was.
Well, an extremely determined woman.
Yeah.
And she would, in a farm, you have to have a scale to measure weigh your livestock and all that kind of thing. And it was in that building called the granary. Well, somehow, let's assume Uncle Noel was in some sort of a wheelchair. She would get his wheelchair out to the granary, and then you have a livestock scale. Well, she apparently had
there's some sort of hook and pulley or something.
Yeah, she had somehow fashioned a harness for him so that she could take the hook on the livestock scale and fasten it to the back of his harness and winch him up onto the horse. Well, once she got him on the horse, she'd tie him in the saddle, and then she would lead the horse for hours probably per day. And in this day and age, we have realized, and they implement, leading handicapped people on horses, sometimes just laying him over the saddle. And the movement of the horse walking is unbelievably therapeutic to the human body. And she persisted with that until she got him back where he could actually walk. And
how fully did he recover?
Well, he recovered well enough so he could walk. He always used a cane, but he farmed with a hired man 250 acres and was, I would say, considering his challenges, I think he was extremely successful. The one thing I didn't learn until after he died was that, he had this intense grin.
Like this?
Yeah. And I didn't realize until after he died that was not a humor grin, that was a grimace grin because of the constant pain he always endured. Yeah. And I remember lots of times my aunt his legs would be so painful, she would spend the night massaging his legs so he could get some sleep.
Interesting. So yeah. He eventually married, I guess.
He married.
Did they have any kids?
They never had children, no. And my brother, during the war, Second World War now, when everybody available was in the Army, they could not get hired help for the summer to help with the harvest. And you always, on a farm, you always have daily chores to do, gather the eggs, milk the cows, etc. And manpower was priceless. It was non-existent.
Yeah.
And my parents would ship my brother and me, who were probably about 8 and 10, even at that age.
Go get to work, huh?
Yeah, we were a priceless commodity.
Go get her done, huh?
They would put us on the train in northern Wisconsin, and we would go to Minneapolis, change trains.
They staple a label on you, like delivered to Iowa?
Well, they figured we could communicate that much.
Parents would be put in jail these days.
And
Plopping your 10-year-old kid on a train by himself.
probably. Anyway, the trains were so crowded there was no place to sit even. So we would sit on top of our suitcases. And Uncle William tells about the time he fell asleep and just about fell off, and he remembers people laughing out at him and saying, "Well, he's asleep." Yeah, but
Fell off the train or off his suitcase?
off the office.
Okay, I had visions of him falling out the door,
No,
onto the tracks or something.
No.
All right, that's good.
Anyway, and we got off about 11:30 at night in West Liberty, Iowa, and we were there for the summer, and we just thought it was wonderful.
Wonderful.
Aunt Gertrude and Uncle Newell.
I send my kids to the farm to work all summer.
Yeah, they had no children, and they treated us like adults.
Oh.
And we thought that was heaven on earth.
Interesting.
I mean, they asked us what to do something one time, and that's all they ever asked, and that's all they ever had to ask, because
So what sort of skills did you learn on the farm in the summer?
children live up to the adults' expectations for them, bottom line. And
that's true.
that is a law that happened working on the farm. I can call, you want me to call hogs? Do a hog calling?
Yeah, yes, do the hog call.
No.
Oh, you just said you were going to do it.
I asked if you wanted me to. I don't think I will, but it's sweet.
So you have to learn. Then the hogs like that noise, and they come running from the slop.
They come running. Yeah, I remember the
Mom's
hogs.
got skills. Hog calling.
Yeah.
Who knew?
They were generally in about a 50-acre alfalfa field in front of the farmhouse. And they came running to beat the band. They knew that meant corn. There was a big wagon full of corn, and we every night had to throw out, 50, 60 acres or ears of corn for the hogs to munch on.
So what else do you do? Feed the hogs?
We fed the hogs, we gathered the eggs, and I felt the hogs were the most intelligent animal
Hogs
on
are
the
pretty
farm.
smart. Yeah.
Next,
Chickens, not so much.
Chickens, I have I suppose if I had leather gloves that went up to my elbows, I wouldn't have minded the chickens so much, but they always peck. They want to hatch that egg, and you're supposed to get it and put it in the basket. And I did not enjoy being pecked at.
Interesting. And do you milk any cows?
Well, yeah, I can milk a cow.
Milk a cow?
Yeah, that's
right.
Milking a cow.
Nice.
You.
So how many hours a day did you work?
Not much. Well, they actually got a milking machine. Probably.
They're high flying.
Yeah. Milking machines had just come out, and I think maybe the first summer was the only summer where we didn't have a milking machine. But
Sounds like Uncle Newell did pretty well for himself buying a bunch of milking machines for his cows.
Now you buy one.
Oh, one.
You move it on a thing from one to another. You just slide it on a.
What else do you know about Cora Bell? That now she came to live with you.
Well, now wait a minute.
We're skipping stuff.
Yeah,
we're
skipping stuff. We're skipping what she did while she was still on the farm. And she decided.
Whose farm did she end up living with? Newell or her own farm?
Well, no, just a minute. This was in the one-room schoolhouse era.
Okay, the sod farmhouse.
No, not the sod
farmhouse. They upgraded from that.
After she married,
What do you know about her husband?
You're interrupting me. You want me to talk?
We're having a conversation. So I'm curious. Her husband, the farmer that she wished was a lawyer.
Yes, she wished he was a lawyer.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know, he was just a very good farmer, an intelligent farmer, and a successful farmer. And I'm sure with her aspirations, she prodded him into building a lovely 2-story, big 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom home.
Oh,
And
nice.
the original homestead farm house was moved to Uncle Newell's property, and my her husband built this very lovely, um, there's a big colonial home, 4-bedroom home.
Very nice.
Yes, it was very nice.
Now, you told me something about the Chautauqua. Did she do a
Well,
Chautauqua
no, wait a
thing?
minute. I need to talk about at one time, the original farmhouse developed a chimney fire.
Oh,
And I don't know why, but Cora Bell was the only adult there to fight the fire. And all of her kids at the time had scarlet fever, and she had to pump the water, keep the kids warm, douse the fire, throw the buckets of water on the fire, and it was kind of her whole focus and capability. Whatever happened, she did it, and
she got it done, huh?
She got it done well. Actually, scarlet fever, as you know, you have to be, well, maybe you probably don't know, you have to be very careful with scarlet fever that it doesn't go into rheumatic fever, and that it doesn't do heart damage. Mm-hmm. And actually, 3 of her 5 children died of heart damage, my mother being one of them.
But your mother died later in a car accident from a heart attack.
Actually, she did. When she saw the car accident coming, her heart stopped. Yes.
So in other words, she didn't die before you were born.
No. She died in her 50s. I was 19. Yeah. She was in her late 50s.
Interesting.
Yes.
All right. What else do we need to know about Cora Bell? Now, she moved and ended up living with you and your family. What do you remember about Cora Bell when she lived in your house?
Cora Bell? Okay. When, it must have been when my grandfather died. After my grandfather died, she could hardly wait to sell the farm and get to city living.
Interesting.
And she's
always a city girl, huh?
She was always a city girl at heart, yes. She wanted culture. And as frequently happens, our aspirations and our concepts are not realistic. And she thought if she moved to the city, she would have a wonderful social life and a wonderful cultural life. And that's not the way it happened.
Superior, Wisconsin wasn't the thriving metropolis she hoped for? Now, where did her other children live? Is that why she moved in with you guys? Or is everyone else still on the farm?
I'm getting there. Okay. Her oldest daughter, my Aunt Laura, had her master's degree in sociology from the University of Chicago, I believe, and was a YWCA executive director. And when my grandfather died and Grandma sold the farm, she was living in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and was the executive director of the Y there. So my grandmother went and lived with her, and the reality was that Laura was working all day and Grandma sat at home all day looking out the window. And that was not especially...
Probably better view on the farm looking out the window.
Yeah. There was nothing inspiring about that. So my Aunt Laura and my mother discussed things, And when the YWCA in Duluth, Minnesota needed a new executive director, Aunt Laura applied for the job and was given the job. And she and my grandmother came to live with us. Aunt Laura rented a room from Mrs. Lee, who lived in the house on the corner, and she boarded. Aunt Laura and Grandma both boarded with us, and all day long, every day, my grandmother sat in the big red chair in the living room and looked out the window.
I wonder what she's thinking about.
Well, we would play pencil games with her occasionally and get her to tell stories, but that was.
What other stories did she tell? Remember any?
I've told you all of them.
Told them.
Yeah, there were not many details, and she was quite hard of hearing too, so that complicated things.
Got it. Interesting.
Yes.
Cora Bell. Well, good to know that. Anything else we wanted to add about Cora Bell in that chapter?
No, I think pretty much that's it.
Did you know any of your other aunts and uncles very well? So Uncle Newell, what happened to Cora Bell's other children? Or what did they do? Were they also farmers? No, they were.
My aunt, there was 3 girls, my mother, Aunt Laura, and Aunt Florence. Aunt Florence married her English professor, who was outstanding, who became head of the English department at the University of Indiana. And when currently there is I believe it's a dormitory named Ashton Hall, which was named after my uncle John Ashton.
John Ashton. So, so that's one. Are there any more kids, Cora Bell had?
Well, yes.
So that's 3 girls. What else?
And 2 boys, Uncle Newell and Uncle Forrest. Uncle Forrest was at the University of Iowa, and with all these kids all in college at the same time, things were very tight, and he knew I don't know if it was his tonsils or bad teeth or a combination of both. But anyway, he died of an infection from those, one or the other or both of those not being taken care of.
How old was he when that?
He was in college. I don't know anything else about it.
So he died in college. Now, to Cora Bell, you said some of her other kids died of scarlet fever?
No, as an older age.
Oh, okay, got it. So they damaged their hearts when they're younger, and when they got older,
they died of the results.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Kind of, they didn't damage their hearts. Their hearts were damaged.
Their hearts were damaged
as a result of.
So they died younger than necessary because.
Well, I think Aunt Florence. I think they were all in there, at least their late 60s, 70s, except for my mother.
Yeah. Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
Very good to know. So we'll count this as the chapter on Cora Bell, and we'll end this one, and then we'll break everything up here. So.